Hey YouTube, this is my Shadowheart build for Baldur's Gate 3 that I use in my playthrough. A lot of people complain that she starts off with the Trickery domain and it kind of sucks and you feel like you have to respec her. Personally, I wanted to try and keep the flavor of the Trickery domain while not actually having to play it, because honestly the Trickery domain does kind of suck. So here was my take on it. I think it worked out really well, and I pretty much didn't take her out of my party for the entire game. So at level 1, instead of a Cleric, we're actually going to take 1 level in Rogue. The benefit of taking Rogue at level 1 is, instead of multiclassing into Rogue, you get an additional proficiency by starting off as it. And as a Cleric, we're going to want to max our Wisdom, followed by Constitution and Dexterity. Personally, I went for 16 Dexterity, 16 Constitution, 15 Dexterity. You can go either or. We're going to change it up as soon as we get our first feat. For skills, I went for Sleight of Hand and Stealth because I wanted her to be that sort of Trickery domain pickpocketer, lockpicker person, in addition to getting expertise in both of those, which doubles your proficiency bonus. Acrobatics, because we're not a high strength character and you want to be able to resist shoves. And then the last one was Perception, just because I like having a high perception score, but if you don't really care about that, feel free to take whatever you like as the 4th one. Now that we've got the base level out of the way, I'm going to go into how we sort of progress as we're leveling up, and the 1 level in Rogue is going to be good enough to make us a sort of supreme lockpicker with our expertise, and you're not going to have to worry about it so much, which means we're going right back into Cleric. And instead of Trickery, obviously, we don't want to play this. You can play whatever you'd like. Personally, I was a big fan of the Light domain when I saw it, and I just wanted to play someone who could throw giant fireballs at people, because my main character was a lightning bolt based character, and I wanted to be able to throw both lightning bolts and fireballs. For cantrips, the two you want to make sure you get are Sacred Flame and Guidance. Guidance is used for pretty much every out of combat check. You want to use it before you lockpick things. You can use it during dialogue. It'll prompt you to use it. And Sacred Flame, you can use in melee range without disadvantage because the saving throw, as opposed to an attack roll, it deals radiant damage and it procs a bunch of nonsense. For the last one, you can pick pretty much whatever you want. I would recommend Produce Flame if you don't have a fire-based spell. Shadowheart, as a half-elf, comes with the Firebolt spell, so she doesn't need that. The benefit of the fire spell is to be able to ignite things, explode barrels, etc. And as she already comes with one, you can just pick whatever. I'll just hit with the default here. And I'll talk briefly about the spells as we get to the new levels. As a Cleric, you can prepare and unprepare spells whenever you'd like out of combat, so it's not too important of your choices, but I'll just mention the ones that are really good. Command is really good. It's a single target CC spell that doesn't require concentration, and there's some unique things you can do with it, like stealing weapons and knocking people prone, which also eats their entire action. Additionally, when you cast it at higher level spell slots, it will target more enemies, which is really powerful. Sanctuary is something you're going to want to keep prepped the entire game. It's a bonus action, no concentration spell, which already is really good. And its effect is you can target an ally or even yourself, and they can't be targeted or attacked by enemies until they break the Sanctuary by attacking an enemy or inflicting some sort of harmful debuff on them, which means you can still run around and buff, you can revive enemies, there's a bunch of actions you can take without actively harming enemies, and it won't pop your Sanctuary. Additionally, you can just use it and then run out of range for opportunity attacks because they can't attack you, obviously, and then just sit there for the full round knowing you can't be attacked. Another powerful spell is Bless. Bless is one of the most powerful buffs in the game because of the bounded accuracy system. 1d4 to attack rolls is really powerful. Additionally, you always want to be targeting Shadowheart and 2 other people with it because it's a 3-creature target and it gives you a 1d4 to saving throws. And the concentration check is a saving throw, so having Bless on yourself will help you maintain the Bless buff. Another really powerful spell is Healing Word. It's just a bonus action heal, which is really strong. And the final spell I want to point out here is Create or Destroy Water. If you're playing any sort of lightning or cold build, Create Water is a great way to apply an AoE of Wet debuff, and the Wet debuff in Baldur's Gate 3 applies double damage for cold and lightning. Additionally, if you up the spell level to 2 or 3, you can cover a wider area with the Create Water spell. Level 2 Cleric, as a light cleric, our channel divinity is Radiance of the Dawn, which deals 2d10 radiant damage and a big AoE around us. It also doesn't affect any allies, so you don't have to worry about friendly fire there, and it recharges on a short rest. Very strong. It can potentially carry you solo through Act 2, because a lot of the undead and fiends in Act 2 are weak to radiant damage. Cleric level 3, we get some really powerful spells here. The two I want to point out are Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon, it did get nerfed a couple patches ago, however it's still really strong. It summons as a bonus action a weapon, and you can choose from any of them. I typically stuck with them all because Daze is more powerful than the bleeding debuffs, and some things are immune to bleeding. However, you can just pick what you want, they're all kind of minor debuffs. It can fly up to 20 feet per turn, and it has resistance to all damage, and enemies will attack it. However, they did change it so AI is less likely to target it, and it can attack once per turn on its own. This does fall off towards the end of Act 2, when the battle arenas you're fighting in are much larger than they are previously, and the 20 feet of fly movement that it gets per turn can't really keep up with how often enemies are moving around. So it's only attacking once every couple of turns, in which case it's not really worth casting anymore, so just keep that in mind. Whenever you start to feel it falls off, you just don't have to prepare it anymore, but it's an extremely powerful spell. The other spell I want to mention is Hold Person. This is another one you want to keep the entire game pretty much. It will paralyze humanoids, and a lot of enemies in this game are humanoids. Additionally, if you upcast it to high-level spell slots, you would target an additional human for every spell slot above level 2. And the paralyze effect is they can't do anything, and anyone who attacks them in melee range will get an automatic critical hit, which is really, really strong. They also will automatically fail any dexterity saving throw. The final spell that I wanted to mention, I always said two, but I just want to point out Blindness. It's a Constitution save, which is a little tougher to use on enemies because they typically have pretty decent Constitution scores. However, it's a 0 concentration CC spell. Blinded is a pretty powerful effect to inflict on people, and additionally, if you upcast it, you can target more enemies. Now, at level 5, you have a couple options. If you already are running with a wizard in your party, such as Gale, you can keep going with the cleric levels. However, I personally wasn't, so what I ended up doing here is taking one level in wizard. This is to get access to a bunch of the ritual spells for the utility that a wizard provides. So the ritual spells being Longstrider, Enhanced Sleep, Disguise Self. There's also Featherfall, and some other ones later. Featherfall isn't showing up here because I believe I already have it learned, so it's not showing up. But essentially how a ritual spell work is, if you're out of combat, you can use it, and it doesn't cost you any sort of spell slot. You can also prepare it and unprepare it as you'd like outside of combat. Additionally, you want to take the Find Familiar and the Shield spell. The Shield spell is a nice reaction to have in addition to your Warding Flare. You would want to use this if you're being attacked by multiple enemies over the course of a round, because one disadvantage versus having a +5 to AC for the whole round is a lot stronger. And the Find Familiar is another ritual spell, and it lets you summon a familiar of your choosing. I personally went with the Raven for the most part, but all of them are strong in their own unique ways, and it'll just follow you around. After you summon the familiar, you don't even have to keep it prepped. You can remove this from your spellbook and put something else in, and it'll still keep following you. The other spell I want to mention here that isn't here because I already know it is Fog Cloud. Fog Cloud's a nice no save sort of battlefield control spell. Now that we have our one level in Wizard, you want to keep an eye out for spell scrolls that you find in the wild, because any spell scroll that you have a spell slot for, and currently as a Wizard 1 and a Cleric, we're about to be a Cleric 4, you're going to have level 3 spell scrolls. Just keep an eye out specifically for scrolls that don't involve a saving throw. Those spells are going to be particularly powerful because we're not going to be pumping our intelligence modifier up that high. So we're going to keep going Cleric now, and you can just pick another cantrip here, whatever you like, and we're going to get our first ability score improvement to improve the Dex or Constitution there, and then our Wisdom score up by 1. Level 5 Cleric, we're going to start getting access to some of the really powerful light domain spells, specifically Fireball. Fireball is just a giant AoE, does a ton of damage. Dex save, but even in the half damage, still going to do a bunch, and it affects a really large area. Daylight is, there's some battles that it's good for in Act 2 specifically. I think I used it a total of once, but it is very good for those because there's some very powerful debuffs that some of the shadows only get when they're in daylight, which doesn't affect by normal light. As far as the actual Cleric level 3 spells, some good ones are Spirit Guardians. This is a very powerful spell, and it upcasts pretty well because it just adds more damage on. How it works is you cast it, and then some Guardians go around you, and of your choice of radiant or necrotic damage, and then whenever you walk towards someone, if an enemy comes into your range, you walk into their range, they will automatically take the damage, or half if they save from the throw, and you can just run around the battlefield and vaporize a bunch of undead. It's really, really strong, especially in Act 2. A couple others to keep an eye out for. Mass Healing Word. It's not very strong at this level, but in later levels it'll be very strong. It's just a bonus action healing spell that procs a bunch of healing effects. Remove Curse is something you're going to be using out of combat for a couple of the curses, but you want to make sure that you have this on hand so that you can prepare it and then remove it when you're done using it. Glyph of Warding is really strong. If you want pure AoE damage, you're better off with Fireball. However, if they're resistant to fire damage, you can use Glyph of Warding with a different damage type. Additionally, it also has the options for an AoE Explosion knockback, so if they're fighting near a ledge or something, that's really good, or an AoE Explosion sleep spell, which is good if you can target an entire enemy group so that they can't wake each other up. And then finally, Animate Dead's pretty good if you want to play around with zombies or skeletons. Now, you again have some options here. If you really like the Channel Divinity feature and you found that once per short rest is not enough, you can take the level 6 here to get your second Channel Divinity charge. Personally, I found once per short rest was enough for me, but I tend to be very conservative with my resources, so what I ended up doing here is going into a Wizard level 2. The second level of Wizard lets you choose a school, and you're going to be choosing Evocation, and the Evocation feature is whenever you cast an Evocation spell, all of your allies will automatically succeed and take 0 damage from them. This means that you can just cast Fireball in the middle of your party, and they will take 0 damage. There's no save, there's no roll, there's nothing required. You can just ignore positioning entirely. And this gets even better with some of the later spells we're going to get as a Light Cleric. And then again, you can just pick whatever spells you want here. Most of the spells, as you see, I have a pretty large spellbook here, and this is because even when you respec, your wizard spells in your book are going to stay there. So now we pretty much have all of the different classes that we're going to want to go in, and the rest of our levels are going to be going straight into Cleric. So at level 6, again, we get our second Channel Divinity charge. We can also use our Warding Flare on allies, which is a nice addition to our defenses and supporting capabilities. Level 10, we get our 4th level spells. As far as the 4th level spells, I found Guardian of Faith was pretty bad. It's essentially a weaker fireball over a couple turns that can maybe eat some attacks. Freedom of Movement's a nice out-of-combat buff that you can do at the start of the day. However, I found the level 4 spell slot was, personally, because I'm very conservative, it's a big commitment and I didn't end up using it. But it is very strong. Death Ward is a very similar case. Banishment I did use for a couple fights in, actually I think it was only one fight in Act 3, but it was very powerful for that one, so just be aware that you have this. However, it's only 2 turns in Baldur's Gate 3 as opposed to the 10 turns it is in Tabletop. Additionally, for the Light Domain, we also get Wall of Fire, which is an extremely powerful concentration spell. You can summon huge walls of fire, and it's a great zoning tool. It does a ton of damage, applies the burning debuff. Do keep in mind that as an evocation spell, your ally is going to automatically succeed and take 0 damage on any save if you just cast it in the middle of them. However, they still will be afflicted by the burning debuff. As a level 8 cleric, all we're going to do here is just finish off our wisdom score. Additionally, we are now also applying our wisdom modifier to the cleric cantrips, which is Sacred Flame pretty much. So it's just a little bonus damage there. Finally, our last level, as a level 9 cleric, we get access to level 5 cleric spells, and as a light domain, we get access to 2 spells. One is Flame Strike, which is essentially a fireball that split damage in half with Radiant. Personally, I did never use this, but if you ever find a situation where you'd want the fireball but want to have only half of it be fire, feel free. The really big thing here is Destructive Wave, and it does thunder and radiant damage in a huge AoE around you, and additionally knocks all enemies prone if they fail on a save. Because it's an evocation spell, it also means you don't even have to worry about the positioning of your allies. You just slam it down, and then you get a huge AoE damage plus the prone debuff, which in Baldur's Gate is actually extremely strong, especially if you can pair it with any sort of movement speed negating thing. Another spell I want to point out here is the Planar Binding. This is very powerful if you know you're going to be fighting any of these types of enemies. Specifically, there's the House of Hope is a dungeon in Act 3, where you're essentially going into hell to fight a bunch of demons, and this spell is extremely powerful there. The other spells are kind of lackluster. I found Contagion, even though it's a very nice no concentration CC spell, it just took too long to activate, and a lot of enemies were immune to poison, and the rest of these I never really ended up using. Alright, so that's the level up process, and then let me go through the wizard spells that I showed off real quick. And you'll notice I have 5 slots available. That's because it's your wizard level equal to your intelligence modifier, and I am using the Warped Headband of Intellect that sets my intelligence to 17, which is a +3, which is why I get 5 spells. If you choose to not use that and use a separate helm piece, you're going to want to, at the start of the game, leave your dexterity at 14 and your wisdom at 16, and then bump your intelligence to 12, and then you only get 3 wizard spells to prepare. So as always, all of the ritual spells you can feel free to use and then unprepare, except for Longstrider. I did find that Longstrider, the buff falls off if you unprepare it, unlike all of the other spells. So this one you are going to want to keep prepped all the time unless you have someone else that's providing Longstrider. It is a very strong debuff, though, that you can apply at 0 cost other than a prepared slot at the start of the day to all of your team. The other spells I like to have prepared are Misty Step. It's just a really good bonus action mobility tool, and you can teleport to things and avoid damage and all that sort of nonsense. Additionally, this is a spell you can get in Act 3. It's related to Gale's Quest, but you don't have to be on Gale's Quest to get it. If you go down in the basement of the Sorcerer's Sundries, you can find this whole puzzle area, and there's 3 magical books hidden. Each book will give a different sort of spellcaster buff if you read it on that specific character you read it on, so you want to make sure you read this book on Shadowheart, and it's called, I think, like Red Soldier of... do I have it in here? Yeah, here it is. The Red Knight's Final Stratagem. So you want to read this one, and it will give you, I believe, a scroll of this, and then all you have to do is learn that scroll. Luckily, it's an evocation spell, so it costs us half as much gold to learn, and it's essentially a magic missile, so there's no save, no attack roll, except instead of 1d4 plus 1, it's 12d6 plus 6 for 6 magic missiles. So a ton of guaranteed damage, was a really strong level 5 spell. Another spell you want to keep an eye out for, so keep an eye out for scrolls of this, is Globe of Invulnerability. This is, in my opinion, the strongest spell in the entire game, and what it does is when you cast it, you want to make sure you don't hit any like enemy stationaries with it, or like enemy bosses with it, because anything in this little globe is going to have complete invulnerability, which is immune to all damage. And I additionally found, and it might be in my limited testing, but any CC spells that were applied to me just didn't take any effect while I was inside of the globe, and it lasts for 3 full rounds while you're keeping the concentration. However, your concentration is not going to break because you're going to be immune to everything while you're inside of it, and you can group your entire allies within it, and then you can poke out and attack from the sides. You can cast spells from inside at no downside, so it actually negates a lot of difficulty for a ton of encounters while you have it up. So that's one I would always keep prepared, and I would always use your level 6 slot on it. Another good spell that you don't actually have to keep prepared is the Conjure Elemental. The level 5 elementals are kind of lackluster, but if you want to invest a level 6 spell slot in it, you can actually summon the Myrmidons, which are all very powerful. My personal favorite was the Air Myrmidon because its auto attack has a stun on it, and it can summon Raging Vortexes, which are big silencing zones that deal damage without concentration. Also, all of the elementals have bonus action teleport and can fly around a ton of movement, and you can also summon them and remove it from the spellbook, and they will stay here. If you're going to do that, I would suggest using the Spellcrux Amulet to restore your level 6 spell slot so you can use it on something like the globe later on in the long rest. For the last spell, typically I would go for Shield. Shield is a nice reaction that you can use, like I talked about earlier. However, if you have another spell that you like, such as Haste or Invisibility, Greater Invisibility, this is another sort of exclusive spell you can get, but this one's a save, so I don't like it as much. Auto Irresistible Dance, if for some reason you don't like Globe, Magic Missile, all this other stuff. There's tons of wizard spells. Just keep your eye out for scrolls and be constantly learning them. Additionally, as a wizard level 1, you can also, once per long rest, replenish a level 1 spell slot. So just always keep that in mind. That's there. It's free. So now to the actual items. Let's go through the elixirs real quick. So on Shadowheart, I personally like using the Battle Mage Powers elixir because a lot of the items I'm using aren't specifically to increase my spell save DC, and Arcane Acuity is a +3 to your DC that ticks down every turn you're in combat. However, the first couple rounds in combat are the most important ones to launch your big AoE spells to kind of reduce the enemy's numbers. So that's when your spell save DC is going to be the most important, and I found that this elixir kind of shored up a lot of the spells failing issues that I had. Some other options you can go for if you don't want to use the battle elixir for some reason are the elixir of vigilance, which just gives you a +5 to initiative, and the elixir of bloodlust, which as always gives you another action when you kill someone. However, I did find that as a more support-based character, even with all the fireballs and nonsense, this was sort of a less powerful elixir, because your sort of job playing a support cleric is to sort of wipe out a bunch of little mobs and then establish a zone of control while continuously buffing your allies. And additional actions don't sort of further that agenda because you can only concentrate on one thing at a time. And once your allies are buffed, they're kind of buff. So I found the Battle Mage elixir to be the elixir of choice for this build. For helmets, obviously I mentioned that I was using the Warped Headband of Intellect. This is for additional wizard spell preparations. Additionally, it allows you to do a stat spread in such that you can get an additional dexterity modifier when you get your first ability score improvement. If you want to start off the game with a 12 intelligence and have your dexterity at 14, then you can forego this and run an actual helmet, which is, there's some really strong ones actually, so there's a good chance for this. I just didn't feel like respecing it because I ran with the intellect circlet the entire game, and by the time I was in the end game, she was already super strong at what she did, and I didn't really feel a need to, go above and beyond. So in Act 1, you have the Repairer's Crown, which is an alternative you can use. It just gives you a 1d6 additional healing whenever you use your healing, so like a healing word or whatever. In Act 2, you can get the Hat of Fire Acuity by killing the Strange Ox, and this is whenever you deal fire damage, you get 2 stacks of Arcane Acuity, which is +1 to your spell DC for each turn left, so it gives you +2. And as a light cleric, you actually have access to Scorching Ray, which is 3 rays of fire, and each one will proc the fire hat, so you will instantly fully stack it up to 6, so it's +6 to your spell save DC. However, it does require you to have some setup, but it also works with Wall of Fire, Fireball, etc., because a lot of your damage is fire, so this is a really good, powerful helm to use. Another one to use is Hood of Weed. It's just no preparation, +2 to your spell save DC. I personally use this on my main character, who was sort of more of a lightning caster, and I wanted to max out the spell save DC on him. However, this is just a very strong generic helm you can use. For defenses, you can use the Helm of Baldurian. This gives you +1 AC in saving throws, stun immunity, crit immunity, and it also heals you 2 points every turn, which will proc a few of the other items at the start of all of your turns. So it's uniquely powerful on this build. And it's a good one to use here if you decide you don't want to use the Intellect Helm. So those are the helms. For cloaks, I just use the Cloak of Protection from Act 2. You get it right away from the vendor. The additional AC, gives you some more defense, and then the saving throw helps with concentration checks. Some other options you get in Act 2. Vivacious Cloak just gives you some temporary HP if you're casting in melee, which you can feel free to do because pretty much all of your spells are saves instead of attack rolls, which means there's no need to worry about a disadvantage. The Thunderstream Cloak can apply daze to reverberated creatures, which is a sort of a combo with these boots that I'll talk about later if you just want to be applying sort of a bunch of debuffs to enemies. And then in Act 3, the Cloak of Displacement is another option for defensive cloaks. It makes all attack rolls against you have disadvantage until you get hit, which sort of provides you another layer of protection, and you can save your reaction for the Warding Flare to use on your allies if you're using this cloak. I think the best cloak for Shadowheart for this build would be the Cloak of the Weed, because it has the offensive capability of adding to your spells DC while also having a short rest refresh absorb elements reaction, which is a good defensive, so it has a mix of both. However, I did end up using this on my main player character, who I just wanted to max the DC on. So as you only get one of these, that's where I used it on, and I just went for the Cloak of Protection. I think both of these cloaks are extremely powerful options for Shadowheart here, and you're not going to be unhappy with either of them. For chest piece, you're going to want to use medium armor, and in Act 1, in the Underdark, you can get luminous armor. This is added in Patch 1. Whenever you deal radiant damage, it causes a radiant shockwave, which applies a 10-foot radius radiant orb debuff explosion, which gives -1 to attack rolls for each stack of it. And I found the explosion actually applies like a bunch of stacks, anywhere from like 2 to 6. I'm not sure what it's based on, but it definitely isn't just one stack. So this is really powerful, especially because your main cantrip is radiant, and you have a lot of AoE radiant damage, such as Spirit Guardians and your big explosion thing here of Destruction Wave is also radiant damage. So it's very easy to apply a ton of stacks that way, and you can find this as early as Act 1, and it's good throughout the whole game unless you want to use some of the other armor. Another armor you can consider in Act 1 is by the Forge if you pick to make the Adamantium Scale Mail. This is just a very generically strong medium armor. However, it doesn't have any particular synergies with this build, so typically I would use this on a different character that's focused on medium armor, and personally in my playthrough I picked the heavy armor and the shield, so I didn't even get a chance to use this, but it is just a very generically powerful medium armor you can use. In Act 2, there are 2 medium armors here, both Dark Justicar plates, depending on what you choose for Shadowheart's character quest finale sort of thing at the end of the temple dungeon. If you go for the side of like light sort of thing, you will get the blue version, and if you go sort of the side of darkness, you will get the purple version. The only difference is +1 AC, and then there's some sort of like Shield of Faith buff on the other one, but I didn't end up using that much. It was essentially just +1 AC, so don't worry about it too much as far as story-wise, because they both give you the 2 most important things, which is when you're obscured, you get an advantage on stealth checks, and you're going to want to be obscured when you're stealth anyway, so this is just really good in general. And then you also get an advantage on Constitution saving throws, which is going to be for your concentration checks, because that's a Constitution saving throw, so you just have an advantage on that now, so that's really good. They also both give you the Shar's Aegis, which is just Shield of Faith once per long rest. So I would personally wear one of these, but you can also feel free to wear the Luminous Armor if you want to be continuously applying that debuff. However, there are a couple other options, most notably a ring and a pair of gloves. They can apply the exact same debuff, and personally I felt like I wanted a more powerful armor piece as opposed to giving it up for the debuff here. For gloves, at the start of the game you can get Hellrider's Pride from Zevlor at the Druid's Glove. If you let the human adventurer knock him out, you can loot them from his corpse. Otherwise you have to either pickpocket him or finish the, I believe, Druid Exposing quest. There's some Druid quest I didn't do that I saw on the wiki that will let you loot these instead. And what it does is whenever you heal an ally, so with Healing Word or later on Mass Healing Word, it gives them resistance to all physical damage in addition to give you a little strength saving throw. So it's a really good in combat sort of pair of gloves to wield. Outside of combat, however, you're going to want to use the Gloves of Thievery, and these can also be found near the Grove. There's a jump nearby, and I'm not sure if it's like buried or not, but it's really close to the Grove. You just like go out the back door and they're right there. And it gives you advantage on sleight of hand checks, which is going to be pickpocketing, lockpicking, disarming traps. You're going to be doing a ton of sleight of hand checks over the course of the game, and being able to have advantage on them is really strong, because it also means it's way less likely for you to crit fail on them, which later in the game when you have a ton of bonuses is pretty much the only way you're going to fail a sort of check like that. And you can also, I'd say like 99% of these checks are made while you're out of combat, which means you can just keep these in your inventory, slap them on, lockpick something, and then take them off. Personally, I just wore these the whole time up until around Act 3, and then during Act 3, when you hit level 11, your proficiency bonus, because we have expertise, which is double proficiency on sleight of hand, became so high that I felt like I didn't even need these anymore, and I just went with a combat gloves to wear the whole time. Another option in Act 1, as far as combat, these are down at the Grimforge. They basically just give you 1 AC, that's it. They're just a pretty good defensive option. In Act 2, you can get the Luminous Gloves, which is another way of applying Radiant Orbs when you deal Radiant damage. If you want to deal Radiant damage and you don't like the other gloves, you can feel free to use these instead. The final gloves you find are in Act 3. I'm pretty sure these are just in a vendor. And they're essentially just the same as Zevlor's, because Blade Ward is the exact same effect that one is listed, although it applies to all damage not just weapon attack damage, which is potentially relevant. You also give a creature Death Ward if you revive it, and you get a free Revivify spell. So it's essentially just a upgraded version of that. Your best in slot boots are actually going to be from Act 1. These drop from Minthara if you kill her. If you decide you want Minthara in your party, you're going to have to wait until sort of halfway through Act 2, where she joins your party, and then you can take them off of her. But the advantage to these is they give you a little move speed, but it's mostly because you can't be knocked prone or moved when you're concentrating. Now, being knocked prone is one of the few ways to break your concentration, and it automatically breaks it regardless of your concentration check that you make, because there's no check. It's just if you are prone, you lose concentration, period. So being immune to that on someone who wants to be sort of a supporting type and always have these debuffs and buffs up, a lot of which require concentration, is really important. And I found that these boots were pretty much better than anything else I could have been wearing. Some options though, in Act 1, obviously you can get these pretty early on, but if you want Minthara in your party, you're not going to have them. You can wear the Boots of Stormy Clamor. These combo with the Thunderskin Cloak, because whenever you inflict a condition on a hostile creature, it inflicts 2 turns of reverberation, and then obviously this cloak is whenever they deal damage to you, they have to make a saving throw and become dazed, because they're already reverberated from your boots. Reverberation is just sort of -1 to all of their physical attributes. The other gloves that are pretty contested, because they're very generically good, is the Disintegrated Nightwalkers from, I believe, Nier in the Grimforge. They have Misty Step that recharges on a short rest, and then you're immune to a bunch of different things. You also can't be knocked prone by Greaser Ice, which is really good, but it's not as good as being completely immune to being prone when it matters most, which is when you're concentrating. In Act 2, at the start of Act 2, you can get the Evasive Shoes if you, again, if you want to have Minthara, and you aren't going to have her at the start of Act 2, this is a great defensive option to have. Acrobatics is what we use to resist shoves, and +1 AC is always good. For necklaces, I kept trying to find a better one than this necklace I got in Act 1, and I honestly just couldn't. There's one other option I'm going to show you, but I was using that again on my main character because I wanted that spell save DC to be absurdly high. But this Amulet of Restoration you can buy from the Myconid Colony and the Mushroom guys, and it gives you once per long rest a Healing Word and Mass Healing Word to just cast for free once per long rest. And these are 2 spells that you are pretty much always going to want to cast, because we are going to have so many effects that buff our allies when we're healing them, and Mass Healing Word will just instantly apply that to all of them, and having 1 Healing Word is also just a good sort of single target thing. Additionally, it heals your allies, so that's always really good as well. The only other thing that I would use an amulet would be the Amulet of Devout, which you can get in Act 3. When you get into Baldur's Gate proper, you go into the temple, you sneak into the basement, and you steal it. You are going to get cursed when you get this, so you have to use Remove Curse, and then when you remove the curse, a demon is going to spawn, so just be aware of that. However, +2 spell save DC is insanely powerful, on top of getting additional charge of your Channel Divinity ability. Again, I use this on my main character, which is why I didn't use it on Shadowheart, but I think it's better than Restoration. However, Restoration is really, really good if you want to conserve resources. For rings, the first ring you're going to want to get is Whispering Promise. I don't quite remember where this is, but it is in Act 1, and what it does is whenever you heal a creature, that creature gets +1d4, essentially the Bless effect, to attack rolls and saving throws. Notably, this doesn't stack with the Bless effect, so if you cast Bless and then cast like Mass Healing Word, it's just going to negate your Bless, and it's going to change the 10-turn Bless into the 2-turn Bless. However, the idea is later in the game, instead of casting Bless on your party, you're going to be just cast Mass Healing Word, and that's going to automatically apply the Bless effect on top of your Gloves effect, so they're going to have resistance to all physical damage and get the Bless effect for 2 turns, which is arguably the most important time of combat is the first 2 rounds, and you can always just refresh it later on. So once you have this ring, equip it, don't ever take it off, it's incredible. The second ring here, this is an Act 2 one, so let me go through some Act 1 ones first. The second ring is essentially just take whatever you'd like. As long as you have the Bless ring, the other one is whatever you like. Smuggler's Ring is found close to where the Gloves of Thievery are, and it gives you +2 to Stealth, +2 to Sleight of Hand, which is obviously 2 checks we're going to be making a ton of the time. Having the +2 in Stealth, plus advantage, plus double proficiency, plus a decent dex score is going to mean you can essentially just stealth in broad daylight, rob someone, and walk away. So this is a really good ring to just sort of keep on, or just keep in your bags next to your Gloves of Thievery whenever you want to do any sort of lockpicking or stealing. Ring of Protection is just a really good generic ring similar to the Cloak. I personally didn't get it in my playthrough because it involved stealing the idol from the Druid Grove, and as far as I could tell, that started conflict. I believe there's a way to do it where you don't do that, but I played mostly blind, so I wasn't entirely sure how it worked. So, but it is a very generically powerful ring you can get. In Act 2, you can get the Ring of Mental Inhibition. This essentially applies a different debuff. It applies Mental Fatigue, which is similar to Reverberation, except it's for the mental stats instead of the physical stats. You can also get the Eversight Ring, which is blind immunity. This also makes you immune to magical darkness, fog cloud, and all that, which is really good. However, Shadowheart specifically has a weapon that gives her blind immunity, so it's less powerful on her than would be on other characters. But if you are running sort of like a darkness-focused team, then this is something you're definitely going to want to run. Finally, actually, no, let's go for the ring I'm actually wearing is also in Act 2. And this is just another Radiant Orb debuff. I found that the ring slot was the easiest place to get this as opposed to the glove or the chest slot. And essentially, whenever you're illuminated, which means whether you're in bright light or if you cast the light spell on yourself, then you will inflict the Radiant Orb debuff on enemies, which, as we talked about before, is just -1 to attack rolls based on how many you get. I think this usually does like 2, unless it's an AoE, then it tends to like snowball. I'm not entirely sure how the application thing works, but just know that it's a really good debuff that will be applied constantly. And then finally, the Ring of Regeneration. It will just give you constant 1d4 healing at the start of your turn, which will also proc Bless and the Blade Ward on you every single turn. So you're effectively, with this ring, always going to have resistance to physical damage and the Bless effect on you. For main hand weapons, in Act 1, in the Creche, if like the monastery area, there's a really long puzzle that I didn't end up figuring out. I just went back later and got it to get the Blood of Lanther. And this is a weapon that would have been really good to have in Act 2. The Lanther's effect is once per long rest. When you fall down, you create like a healing aura, which is good. But the main reason we're here is these two effects. Lanthar's Light is just a passive that you can flick on and off, and it sheds Holy Light in 20 feet, which is really good because it's a 20 feet radius. And then all fiends and undead standing in the light are blinded unless they save on a throw, which is really powerful because all of Act 2 is pretty much fiends and undead. Additionally, you get the Sunbeam spell, which is a level 6 spell that you can keep using as long as you keep concentrating on it every turn. It's also an evocation spell, so as a evocation wizard, you don't even have to position it. You just blast lasers wherever you want once per long rest. And having a level 6 access to a level 6 spell at whenever you get this in Act 1, so like a level like 4 or 5, is extremely powerful. In Act 2, there's 2 rewards for Shadowheart's quest that are really strong for her. And I do like that both the armor and the weapons that you get from sort of finishing her Act 2 quest are uniquely good on Shadowheart. So for finishing sort of the darkness side, you get the Darkness Spear, where you get essentially at-will darkness, refreshes every turn. There's a weapon art that summons darkness when you attack. You're immune to blind, and you have advantage on saving throws whenever you're light or heavily obscured. And the weapon itself deals a little more damage, but you're not really going to be weapon attacking, so don't worry about that too much. And then if you go the light side, you're going to get this spear. The darkness actually doesn't affect Shadowheart, the dark vision, because she's a half-elf, so she already has dark vision. But you do get advantage on wisdom saving throws, which is an extremely common saving throw, and perception checks, which you make all the time. In addition to getting Moon Mode, which is, it does use concentration, so it's not that good, but it's a nice little debuff to sort of have going once per long rest. And Moonbeam is a very powerful spell. It's similar to Sunbeam, except it's more of like a ranged circle area that you can keep moving around. And it's a level 3 spell, so it does a little less damage. Finally, in Act 3, you can just start using any sort of staff with +1 to spell save DC. All of those are going to serve you well. I do want to point out that the one that most people talk about, the legendary one, is actually not that good on Shadowheart, because the favor effect here that you sort of choose an element to be imbued with, the fire one isn't very good because heat is not a very strong debuff. So just keep that in mind. You have other casters that may want to use this. It might be better on them. The one I ended up going with is the Woe Staff. This is at the end of Asterian's quest in Act 3. There's a boss at the end, and they will drop this. The reason I went with this over others is because it has the effect of whenever a creature fails a saving throw that you do, you regain hit points. And of course, whenever you regain hit points, you're going to proc Bless, and you're going to proc the Blade Ward effect. So that's why I went with this one. I don't really use the Blight that much. I'm more focused on other spells, but it is there, I guess. There's a ton of spells there's a ton of staves in Act 3 that just give you +1, so pick your favorite. Finally, for shields in Act 1, you can, I believe this is the Goblin Camp, but it might be somewhere else. It's just a generic +2 shield, +2 armor class is great, and then +1 to saving throws just sort of helps with your concentration checks. In Act 2, you get the Shield of Devotion. This gives you Aid, which is sort of a self-target +10 hit points. You just use it at the start of the day and forget about it. And then it also gives you 1 level, 1 spell slot. Notably, this is kind of bugged, so there's a way to sort of get infinite level 1 spell slots, sort of looping this. So if you're in the habit of abusing bugs and you don't want to be, dragged down to that rabbit hole, maybe avoid this shield, just run a different shield. At the end of Act 2, the final boss you'll fight at the end of Act 2, drops this shield. I ended up using this again on my main character because I wanted to stack the spell save DC on that guy. However, it's a very strong shield. It gives you advantage on dex saving throws, which are extremely common, and you get a +1 to your spell save DC. In Act 3, there's another family, essentially, to Shadowheart's quest. You've already committed to a route, and now you have to go out and finish it. You get this from the boss you fight at the very end of it. It's a +3 shield, so you get a little more defense there. It gives you advantage on saving throws against spells. Spell attacks at a disadvantage, so a ton more defense there. The reaction you don't really want to use. It deals force damage, but the knock prone chance is not very high because I found item saving throws are different than your regular saving throws, so they're not very good. So I wouldn't really bother with that. Plus, you have a ton of the reactions. However, you can get Warding Bond for free, and there's a bunch of creative ways to use Warding Bond with like resistance and other stuff, so feel free to use that, and you don't have to prepare it anymore. However, Reflective Shell is actually a really powerful buff. It's no concentration, refreshes on a short rest, the bonus action lasts for 2 turns, and it reflects all projectiles that go to you. I personally essentially walked Shadowheart into the middle of a crowd of archers, popped this, and just watched everyone kill themselves. So there's a lot of creative ways you can do this. I think this is a really good shield both defensively and offensively. Finally, for our ranged weapons, you can choose to use a short bow or a longbow that has like a haste spell on it or initiative bonuses. Personally, I really like using double hand crossbows because with our 1 level dip in rogue, we actually do get proficiency in hand crossbows, which means as a bonus action, we can make a ranged attack with a hand crossbow and add our proficiency bonus to it. Additionally, we have a 1d6 sneak attack damage that we can proc pretty often if an ally is near that enemy. So it's actually a good chunk of damage that only costs you a bonus action, which you're pretty much always fighting to find a use for every turn. So it's good to just have that option as opposed to some sort of generic buff. I personally went with the Fire Stoker just because a lot of our spells apply the burn debuff, so you can consistently get that additional 1d4. However, you can just go with a generic hand crossbow +1, or I believe there's +2s in Act 3. I haven't hunted around for them. In Act 2 specifically, there are 2 really powerful hand crossbows, the Neremisser and the Hellfire hand crossbow. However, they're also the best hand crossbows for like combat in addition to giving free spells on them. So I was using them on Asterian over here because he was like a hand crossbow dual wielder character, and I wanted him to have the most powerful ones as opposed to someone who's just going to be using it as an offhand attack every now and then. So that's the build, and I pretty much didn't really change it as I was playing. I sort of prepped for it, and when I played through, I didn't really have to respec anything or like rethink my decisions. All of the mechanics I was hoping for that worked actually worked. Some of them even better than I was hoping for. So I hope you enjoy it if you decide to play it either for Shadowheart or your main character. There's a couple different ways you can go with the build as far as different armors and helmets and how you use your spells and stuff, but in general I think it's very powerful. It does a lot of damage, it applies a bunch of buffs. You can essentially do everything a cleric can, everything a rogue can, in addition to having some of the most powerful spells in the game at your disposal.